The Microsoft Activision buyout has been a roller coaster of a ride since day one. But today, things have taken an even more dramatic turn, with Sony making wild accusations and also being exposed for how they truly feel about this deal. Let's check it out right now. So if you're as tired of the Activision deal as most people are, I'm very sorry, but I can't get enough of this. I'm enjoying learning about it and watching it take place right in front of me. It's also been great to see the drama unfold. But for the most part, this is going to set a precedence for the gaming industry for the future on how things are going to work when it comes to buyouts and mergers, and honestly how these companies are going to be dealing with each other, considering Sony has been extremely vocal about how they don't want this deal to go through, and they've made even claims that they would like to see the CMA and other regulators force Call of Duty to be sold off from this whole Activision buyout so they continue becoming an independent company, because Sony would rather deal with an independent version of the Call of Duty publisher rather than having to deal with Microsoft. They have no interest at all in Microsoft becoming the owner of Activision Blizzard and having Call of Duty as part of that portfolio. And one of the accusations that they make is that Microsoft has been dragging their feet on trying to negotiate with PlayStation, which in my opinion is completely far from the truth. Microsoft has made numerous attempts to negotiate with PlayStation. If you listen to most analysts, Sony themselves have been very uncooperative when it comes to the negotiating part of this whole deal. And analysts even say regulators should bring it up to Sony that they have been extremely uncooperative. And Sony has even gone as far as trying to say that they feel that Microsoft is not going to give them an equal version of Call of Duty, which is ironic considering Sony has done a good job of making sure that there hasn't been an equal version of Call of Duty, and that the more pro version or the best version to have has always been on the PlayStation side, which is outlined on FOSS patents. The types of deals Sony has in mind are not in the interest of consumers. Apart from making it harder for the Xbox to compete with the market leader PlayStation, the latest Call of Duty title that just launched, Modern Warfare 2, comes with a host of PlayStation exclusive benefits, some of which even distort competition in a different sense: competition between gamers, as PlayStation users will make progress more quickly than Xbox users. That sounds equal to you. That's very interesting, considering it's black and white right there, that if you play Call of Duty on PlayStation, you will progress in the game faster and have a lot more features, because PlayStation has made sure that features and that progress will be held back from the Xbox version. But that wouldn't happen if by some chance this whole buyout goes through. And Phil Spencer even outlined it, and it was covered by Eurogamer. Call of Duty will no longer feature console-exclusive DLC content if it is owned by Microsoft, Xbox, Phil Spencer said. Speaking to Xbox On, Spencer said the future versions of Activision's shooter franchise would simply aim to be the best version of Call of Duty on any platform without offering extra skins or guns to Xbox players. The same version of the game will be available on all platforms, which is really what we do today. Like if you're a Minecraft player on PlayStation, I don't think you feel like you have the lesser version of Minecraft or Minecraft Dungeons or Legends, which is coming out when it ships. We want to make sure those players feel like they have great experiences on the platform they choose to play on. And it can't be said any simpler. Microsoft wants to give equal versions of the games to anybody where that game exists. This was even outlined in the 10-year agreement that Microsoft made over in Brussels with Nintendo and Nvidia for content and feature parity for Call of Duty to appear on those platforms, expanding the player base of Call of Duty by 150 million platforms that currently don't have Call of Duty on them. This is just one reason why Sony is desperate to make sure Microsoft doesn't end up owning Call of Duty. They want PlayStation to remain the #1 place of gamers' choice to play Call of Duty. They've gotten gamers to choose PlayStation by incentivizing them with better progression mechanics and access to weapons that nobody else won't have. But another way that they have gotten incentive was through the Activision side, and this is by giving Activision a bigger cut of revenue from the PlayStation Digital Store. PlayStation normally takes 30% from most things sold on the digital store, but when it comes to Activision titles, especially Call of Duty, PlayStation gives a bigger cut to Activision. They're not taking that full 30%. And this has been one of the reasons why Activision for years has been making sure that PlayStation has been the #1 place to play. And it seems like if this deal goes through, they'll no longer have that edge to make sure gamers choose PlayStation as the #1 hardware for playing Call of Duty. And the claims that keep getting wilder, especially when it comes to Sony worried about an equal version of Call of Duty, was how they have also suggested to regulators that Call of Duty is going to suffer on the PlayStation ecosystem because Microsoft is going to release an inferior version on the PlayStation ecosystem to get players to migrate over to the Xbox ecosystem. This can be done by creating an unoptimized, very buggy mess of a game that will be released on the PlayStation side. And Microsoft will, again, drag their feet on releasing patches and other fixes that would be necessary to make sure that the game is an optimal experience on the PlayStation side. And that's, again, Microsoft has come out and kind of created that narrative a little bit, because over on a separate occasion, speaking at the Jefferies Interactive Entertainment Conference, Xbox Chief Financial Officer Tim Stewart discussed how much Microsoft intends to handle the release of Bethesda games, and this was during the Bethesda purchase. He was quoted in saying, "What we want is to make sure that the content in the long run to be either first or better or best. Pick your differentiated experience on our platforms. We want Bethesda content to show up the best as on our platforms." That's why Sony's worried, because Microsoft has shown that they do want to make sure that the best place to play any title that is owned by Microsoft is on the Xbox ecosystem. So that's where Sony has decided to go the route of being very worried that Microsoft is going to show no concern or priority to fix any situation that may occur on the PlayStation side. And Sony has even said that most players figure out where they're going to buy the game within the first week or so of the game's release. And if they see things are a buggy mess over on PlayStation, well, they're going to go to where that situation doesn't exist, and that's on platforms that Microsoft favors. But Phil Spencer even kind of knocks that whole narrative down, which was covered on an opinion piece written for the Wall Street Journal, covered by VGC. The main supposed potential anti-competitive risk Sony raises is that Microsoft would stop making Call of Duty available on the PlayStation, but that would be economically irrational. A vital part of Activision Blizzard's Call of Duty revenue comes from PlayStation game sales. Given the popularity of crossplay, it would be also disastrous to the Call of Duty franchise and Xbox itself, alienating millions of gamers, making Call of Duty exclusive to the Xbox ecosystem. And part of that alienation that Phil Spencer talks about would be making a buggy mess of a game. They don't want to affect the revenue that Call of Duty generates because that would be completely irrational. And speaking of the revenue, if this deal goes through, Sony has shown that whole cut that they give Activision now of extra money, PlayStation says that deal is off the table. They will take full revenue from any sales that take place on the PlayStation Network that revolve around Activision titles, because they don't want to give Microsoft any more money than they have to, which definitely, I don't blame them for that, because definitely Microsoft would be a little bit of a powerhouse with that franchise and the Activision titles that are under their umbrella as part of their portfolio now. The last recent statement Sony made that I want to cover is an interesting one. They came out and said that if Microsoft owns Call of Duty, PlayStation would be financially hurt by this, especially when it comes to multi-game subscription services. There is one quote I want to cover out of their whole speech that they made to regulators, and it's very heavily redacted, but we'll try to work around it. Microsoft proposes to license large amount of redaction if SIE agrees to pay large amount of redaction under the terms of proposed that amount and more redaction. You can see like Microsoft is wanting to license out Call of Duty. This would commercially destroy SIE's multi-game subscription business model. A yearly subscription to PlayStation Plus Extra, SIE's mid-tier MGS service, is priced at around $100, and the buy-to-play retail price of Call of Duty today is around $70. Under Microsoft's proposed terms, SIE would therefore be required to pay, really big redaction. As the below chart shows, this would leave SIE with only blank full $100 annual subscription. They're wanting to say that if you look at it, they're not going to make that 30%. It's going to migrate a lot of the revenue that they make off of Call of Duty from that 30% model in the store to a much lower profit margin in their multi-game subscription service, because that's what Sony's going to have to do to compete, because they know Xbox is going to put it in Game Pass, and they are really not in a big favor of this. And that's the funny part about it. They have put all their eggs in one basket when it comes to this whole Call of Duty situation. This is why I have from day one said that Sony shouldn't be putting as much of their whole gaming ideal when it comes to multiplayer in Activision's hands, because what if by some chance something happens to Activision? Hell, what happens if by some chance this deal doesn't go through and Activision just runs itself into the ground because of how they treat people, and Call of Duty just falls flat on its face? Well, you ain't gonna get no revenue then. Why would you stake a majority of your company's success on a third-party title? We saw this bite Microsoft in the ass with titles like Scalebound, how a company completely mismanaged a game and it financially hurt Microsoft to where they didn't want to deal with third-party developers for a little while, or making big third-party deals, which really allowed Sony to come in and make a lot of third-party deals. But Sony's real big exposure is the situation where Lulu Chang, we all know the Activision executive that has been very vocal on Twitter, came out and pretty much slammed Sony. Her first statement was Microsoft offered Sony, the dominant console leader for well over a decade with 80% market share, a 10-year agreement on far better terms than Sony would ever get from us. By us, she means Activision. We've also offered Sony guaranteed long-term access to Call of Duty, but they keep refusing. Why? And then she goes into a second tweet on the answer to the why. The CEO of SIE answered that question in Brussels in his words, I don't want a new Call of Duty deal. I just want to block your merger. The truth has come out that Jim Ryan, from day one, has never wanted this merger to go through. He has never wanted to negotiate with Microsoft, and he wants to dictate to the industry on how competition should work. And I just really feel that no company should have that much power to dictate how an entire industry should be allowed to do business. And this is one of the ways Sony has kept a stranglehold on this industry for as long as they have, because they are literally trying to use their install base as a bullying tactic to make sure that the industry does not grow or evolve in any manner other than in a way that they see fit that benefits them. Well, that does it for this video. I hope I've covered this week's little bit of drama that seems to be coming out daily when it comes to this whole ABK deal. Until next time we meet again, my friends, I am Centurion 1307, and thank you for watching.